So we are ready to go ahead and start our wrap. And I have my wrap, the outside of my wrap, which is 4.5 by 22. So you need actually two pieces that are 4.5 by 22. One will be the lining, and I'm choosing to do this cute little print. So I will put the lining of the wrap aside for now. And before we can embroider it, we're going to give our wrap a fitting on our little pillow. So you got to have your pillow done, which we've already done, and put our zipper in. And basically what we need to do is, I will kind of finger press this so I know where the center of my 22-inch piece is. And I will put it over the middle of my pillow, lining up the finger press line with the seam line in the middle of my pillow. So I'll turn it over. And we're doing it this way as opposed to giving you a measurement because your pillow might be a little fluffier or a little flatter than mine. So we're going to do it this way. So I turned it over and I'm folding back my excess fabric and making my fold even with the seam line in the back of the pillow. And I'll just kind of pin it on there. I'm actually pinning it to the pillow. Do the same with this side. So we're going to make this the same size as the pillow. Then when we sew it and we put our buttons on it, there's 1.25 inch overlap. It'll be just enough snugness to make it look nice. So you can see I've turned that under and I've lined up my fold with my seam line. And I still should have my center marked, which I do. So now that I've got that marked, I will just put the pins just in the wrap itself, removing it from the pillow. Then this will be my new measurement. So if on my particular pillow, this actually measures about 19.25. So I'm going to finger press this again because that's exactly where I'm going to cut it off. I'm not even going to allow for any seam allowance. Don't need to. So I'll open that out and I will cut it exactly on that line. So now my wrap will be the right size, and when I embroider my pineapple in the middle of it, I'll know where the middle is. So there you go. So I will go ahead and cut my lining piece the same length as my outside piece. And I can just line them up. And cut them the same length. So we started it out with a little bit longer, but that's okay because depending on your particular pillow, you may or may not need a little extra fabric. So let's just reestablish my center to make sure I still have it. There's my center. So the next step will be to go ahead and hoop some sticky stabilizer, which I've done. I've scored it and I'm going to peel away the paper. And now I'm ready to put this on the machine and get stitching our wrap. So our first step is to put water-soluble thread in the needle, and it's going to stitch a placement stitch for me to put our wrap on the sticky paper. So next, I'll take my wrap with my center mark, my center crease, and I'll line up the center crease with that line on the sticky paper. That shows me where the center is. Same at the bottom. And then the next step is the placement stitch for the pineapple in the water-soluble thread. Then I'll take my pineapple fabric and place it over the pineapple placement stitch. And now we'll trim it nice and close. And now we'll go ahead and put some detail stitching thread on for the pineapple. Just clean it up a little bit. And the next step is the placement stitch for the top of the pineapple. And for that we'll use my green thread. And we will place our fabric for the top of the pineapple over the placement stitch and tack that down. And now we need to trim our applique nice and close. So the next step is to go ahead and put our brown back in for the pineapple body, and it will do a satin stitch around the pineapple. Next step is to put in the green, and the green is going to satin stitch around the top of the pineapple. So we're on the last step, and we're going to put our brown thread back in, and it'll finish out the top of the pineapple. Cute little pineapple's done. So we're going to unhoop it and put our wrap together for the pillow. Now it's time for me to take my little pineapple off my sticky paper. So I'm just going to very carefully pull it back, and you can either use a scissors or a rotary cutter and just kind of trim around it. I'm going to leave my sticky paper in the hoop so I can make a patch and do our last step, which is the buttonholes. So that's why I'm not just unhooping it. So that little hole will be patched for later, so we'll put that aside. And then this is the back of it, and I'm just going to go ahead and leave it. That stabilizer will be just fine in there. If you have a white fabric and it shows through and you want to trim a little closer, you can do that. So now the next step would be to take some type of interfacing. You can use a fusible or a sew-in, just some little scraps, and we're going to place them right here on each end, and this will support the buttons and the buttonholes. So mine happens to be a sew-in. And then we'll take our lining fabric and this fabric, and we'll put it right sides together, and we will go ahead and stitch. So I've got my little wrap pinned right sides together, and my scrap of interfacing is on the end. I'm just going to go ahead and stitch a 1/4 inch seam on the two long ends. Doing a little back stitch at the end. So we'll do a back stitch at this end as well, and then we'll turn it around and do the other side. Oh, and maybe I forgot to mention, we should leave an opening to turn this. So I'm going to do a little back stitch here, and I'll just come up here, maybe an inch or so from the end, and do another small back stitch. Because we need to have a place to turn it. So I just left it there. I like to do it in the back as opposed to the front. So now we will go ahead and take this to the ironing board and get it turned and pressed, and then I'll show you how to close up these ends. So just like on the pillow cover, we're going to turn these ends over right at the seam line, just like that, and lower my presser foot and go ahead and stitch it right down, do a little back tack. And when you get to this end, you will do the same thing, turn it right at the seam line. And this will help you get a nice sharp corner when you turn this right side out. Little back tack. So there you go, there's your corner turned and your corner turned, and I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on the opposite end. There you go, you have your corners done, and now we're going to take it to the ironing board, and before we turn it, we're going to press this opening in so it's easier to close it up when we're finished. So before we turn this right side out, I like to take this section that we have open and press it right on the stitching line, because that way when we go ahead and turn it, it's going to be so much easier if this is already pre-pressed for us. And I'll go a little bit into the stitching, but mostly I'm going to do it right where that opening is. And I'll turn this around and get the other side too. It'll just make turning that a little bit easier. So now we'll go ahead and turn this through this opening, and we'll come back and finish up our wrap. And I'll just grab a pin and work out these corners very gently. So you can see that how nice that corner is. This is the end where our opening is, and you can see we already have it pressed in, which will help a lot when we go to close it up. Let's see here. Okay, so we got our corners turned, and so now we're going to just go ahead and give this a good press, and we'll take it back to the sewing machine and top stitch it. So it's time to top stitch my wrap. So I've got thread to match my wrap outside and the bobbin and the needle, so it looks pretty. And I'm going to use that same thread to do my buttonholes when it comes time to do that next. So we'll go ahead and give this a nice little edge stitch around the entire piece. Edge stitch is about 1/8 of an inch away. So now we're ready to take our wrap back to the embroidery machine and do the buttons and the buttonholes. So I have my sticky paper back on the machine, and this is the same sticky paper that I used to do my applique, and you can kind of see the shadow of the applique. And I took like a scrap of it and I stuck it right over that shadow so I don't have to get a whole new piece. So we can put that back on the machine, and the first step is to use water-soluble thread, and it's going to stitch a placement stitch. And this placement stitch will be for our buttonhole. So after our placement stitch is done, we can take our fabric that we're going to use for the buttons and place it right over the placement stitch. And stick it down. And then the water-soluble thread is going to tack that down, and it's also going to stitch the buttonhole, or the button sizes. It's going to stitch a circle. And the circle is what we'll use to cut out the button later. So this will be the exact size of the button. And the next step is going to stitch a placement stitch for our wrap. Just going to move a couple threads here first. So it will stitch a place for me to stick the wrap to the sticky paper. So we will take, here's our wrap, so we will take the right end of the wrap and just place it inside that placement stitch. And I've already got in my bobbin, I've already got my yellow thread. So I'm going to take and replace the needle thread. We don't want to make a buttonhole with water soluble. So I will put my yellow thread in the needle. So the next step is still with the water soluble thread, and it's going to just tack down this wrap so it doesn't move on us while it's doing the buttonholes. And then I'm going to go ahead and change my needle thread to the yellow to match my wrap, and I've already got the yellow in the bobbin. So now it'll do the buttonholes, and it'll also do the little monogram over in the buttons. And these buttonholes will fit exactly right for the 7/8 inch covered button. So I'm going to go ahead and remove my sticky paper from the hoop. Put my hoop aside. Let it crash to the floor. And then we can go ahead and kind of cut my buttonholes out real quick, or my buttons. And then on my buttonhole side, I'm going to just snip these threads from the water soluble. They're a nice long basting stitch, so they snip real easy. Just to remove it. There we go, and then we can just very carefully support the buttonhole with your thumbnail and tear away the sticky paper, just so you don't tear the stitches. There we go. We have our little buttonholes on there. Just got a couple little threads to pull out. And then to cut open the buttonholes, I have one of these handy dandy little buttonhole knives. I love it. It's got a little, it's like a small little thin chisel with a protective cover on it, so when you put it in your drawer, you won't cut anything or yourself when you find it. And you just put that between the stitching lines and very gently, I'm on a cutting mat of course, push it down. Cut my buttonholes open. So now we have our buttonholes. So we can go ahead and put this aside for now, and we're going to cut out our buttons. We can cut it right on that water-soluble stitching line. And again, I'm not using my little hoop scissors because I'm cutting through all this stabilizer and it'll just dull them. And I love those scissors for trimming fabric in my hoop. So I like a nice sharp scissor all the way to the point. So I will use my other good scissors for this. Let's use the right tool for the right job. Now I do like to remove some of the stabilizer, because it's a little thick to have inside your button. So if I just turn it over and use the tip, just the tip of my little hoop scissors and kind of make a small hole, I can kind of peel it back. And again, support the stitching with my thumbnail, and I can just tear off most of it and just leave it right in the stitching like that. So our little 10-inch pillow has 2 buttons, and our 16-inch pillow has 3 buttons. So I'm going to be doing the 10-inch. Same size buttons, same size buttonholes, but there's just less of them on the smaller one. Okay, so there's my little button covers ready to be covered. So we are ready to go ahead and cover our covered buttons, and we're using the Dritz covered buttons, and you can get them in a kit. I got the big kit because I'm doing a lot of pillows, and these are the 7/8 inch size, and the kit comes with, this is a round disc that you can use to trace your fabric to make your own button cover. But we've digitized that for you. So if you don't want to use that, you can go ahead and use this to make your circle. It'll also come with, these are a couple of tools you use to make your buttons. And then these are the button backs with the shanks, and these are the button fronts. So to cover them, I like to use my glue stick, and I will take a little bit of glue and just put it right over that stitching or the center of my button. And then, let's get the middle here. I will sort of hover over that and place my button as best as I can right in the middle of it. So I'm attempting to get that little monogram centered right over my button. So I'm going to let that dry for a couple of minutes, and then we will come back and cover the buttons. So I would let my little buttons dry for about 15 minutes, And now it's time to go ahead and assemble them. So I will pick it up and put it inside this little plastic cup. So you'll just very gently push it in there using your thumbs. And you can see your monogram should be centered, hopefully. And I just take the tip of my mini scissors, not using the blade, and just gently pushing it in. And then you can gently just kind of fold your fabric in. You can use your thumb or something small and thin like the scissors. Just work it in. It kind of pleats around there. And once you get it where you think it's in there pretty good, like this, then you can take your button back. Now, if you think ahead, which I don't always think ahead, but I'm going to try to do that today. I have my monogram this direction. So I'm going to try to get my button shank going the same direction. So when I sew them on, hopefully it'll be a little easier to get that straight. So I will just turn this over and put this straight down. And that's where this little blue cap comes in. There's an opening on one side. You can turn it over, place it over your button, and if you're strong enough to just squeeze it to pop it in. I'm not, so I use my really big pliers. And I just gently go around it. And you can feel it when it goes in. I just heard it pop. So once it goes in, take a look around the rim, and you can see that that little back is totally inside. And then you just turn it over and pop it right out. And you have a real pretty little covered button. So we'll go ahead and do the other one. And again, we're going to try to make our monogram and our button shank going in the same direction. And if you don't do that, it's not a huge deal. You just have to pay a little more attention when you sew on your button to get it straight. There we go. So give it a check. It looks good. Then I can pop it out. And I have my two little monogram buttons ready to sew on to my wrap. So we are ready to mark and sew our buttons. So to mark our buttons, it's real simple to do. You'll take your wrap, fold it wrong sides together, and on the buttonhole side, just line up your ends, line up all of your edges so they're even. And on the buttonhole side, take a pin and put a pin through the end of that buttonhole so it comes out the other side. It's the end, just like that. So on the other side, the pin comes out, and I take like a friction pen or something will come off later, nothing permanent. Make a little mark where that pin comes out. That's exactly where you're going to sew your button. And I've already got a needle threaded up, double thread with a knot on the end. And I'm just going to take a stitch, 2 stitches to anchor that. There's one, here's two. And I want my button to be this direction. So let me just, I'm going to go this way with my anchor stitch, because then it'll go with my shank. There we go. So now I'll take the button, put it through the shank, put the needle through the button shank, and take a stitch. Make sure it's not twisted. There we go. There. So once we get that one stitch in, then it's going to be real easy because we just put the needle through the shank, take a stitch, and I will do this, since it's a doubled thread, I will probably do this 2 to 3 times. It's not going to get a lot of buttoning and unbuttoning. I would imagine I'm going to button it once and it's going to stay buttoned. So I don't need to do a ton of stitches. So this is the third one. Then I'll go all the way through to the back. And on the back side we'll just take a little stitch right through all those stitches I did. Put the thread through the loop, pull it tight to make a knot, and we'll do that one more time. And before I cut my thread, I'll make my next knot for the other button. Okay, so the next button, same thing. We'll take our stitch, another anchor stitch, make sure our buttons go in the right direction. There's 2 stitches. There's 3. And now we'll pass the needle to the back. So both of my buttons are facing the right direction, according to my pineapple. Don't sew them upside down. I did that on one of mine. Had to take them out and do them again. Take a couple knots. This is a thread I always have in my pincushion ready to sew things on, so if it's still got enough thread on it, I go ahead and make another knot, even though I'm not right now going to do another button, but then I'll have a thread ready to go. So there we have our cute little monogram buttons. So we're going to go ahead and button them, button our wrap together. And now we'll go ahead and put it on our pillow. So here's my pillow. Let's back up a little bit. Here's my pillow with the zipper at the bottom. And what I'm going to do is put my hand through the wrap, kind of squish my pillow, kind of like putting a girdle on your pillow. You're going to want to get it centered. So there you go. There's your cute little pineapple wrap with the monogram buttons.